naturally sweetened also doesn't mean that it doesn't have cane sugar and that
Right.
it's not going to be harsh on your blood sugars. So
Right.
I think these companies are really smart and persuasive.
Yeah. The one that I look at, again, out of interest, just solely looking at shelves, are some of the probiotic sodas and the things that are out there. And do you really need probiotic soda? Right. And it's not carb free from a
No.
standpoint of evaluating for diabetes and insulin and blood sugar. It is not carb free. It's definitely much lower than your classic
Right.
whatever on the store shelf of real soda. But if you're going to eat probiotics, go eat some sauerkraut or kimchi.
Right.
Welcome to Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast, where our goal is to keep you informed, inspired, and a little entertained on all things diabetes. The information contained in this program is based on the experience and opinions of the Integrated Diabetes Services clinical team. Please discuss any changes to your treatment plan with your personal healthcare provider before implementing.
So today we were going to hop on and talk about maybe the most inquired questions that people have about reading nutrition labels. And what
Yes.
better way than to get two registered dietitians on a podcast?
That's right. No, we get questions all the time. And even I think the other, nurse clinicians in our office, they get questions as well. And I'm sure multiple other educators, regardless of the discipline that they start with, it's always a question because food is a kind of a cornerstone of managing, right?
Mhm.
So, what's on a label, useful information, and what do we do with it? But you also
Right.
have to know how to read it and decode what does it mean?
Right. And I always like to remind people that the food industry is in the business of marketing. They are not always in the interest of health and wellness, and certainly
No,
not diabetes management. And
no.
so, I think first we have to maybe comment and maybe even list, what are the FDA regulated definitions? And there
Right.
are quite a bit, specifically about sugar, talking about diabetes management, sugar free, zero sugar, and no sugar added or even reduced sugar. These are all FDA languages, and
Mhm.
actually mean something in terms of
Different.
numbers and how, right, exactly. The one thing that I like to look for is the added sugar. That is a
Yeah.
new label that came out, I don't know, what, 2, 3 years ago?
I'd say it's about 3 years ago, yes. I think it's almost the same timeline as when they started, and you won't see this on all the labels, but they started even defining total fiber
Right,
as soluble and insoluble. And I think
right.
that sugars piece it came around the same time frame.
Yeah. And I really love that addition to the label because so many foods that we want to include for a healthy diet have natural sugars. And so a lot
Right.
of times people get confused over, looking at yogurt and seeing the sugar label or the sugar grams on that. And that's not added sugar. If you're
Right.
buying the right product, it's definitely a natural sugar that can be included in
Right.
in good, you know,
Right. Or even some of the like applesauce in a pouch, for
right.
example. They're so like cool thing to do for kiddos, especially they're easy on the go. And you look on the label and it says that it's unsweetened. There's another
Right.
one of those like
Yep.
terms, right?
Yep.
Unsweetened. But then you look on the label and you can see sugars, but as you said, it's natural fruit sugar.
Right, right. And so that would be, I think, in my bucket of just fine. And,
Yes.
happy to see that as long as there's not a bunch of added sugar, which I
Right.
think you can see in a lot of products just how much junk is added if you only look at that, added sugar line.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. So defined, in terms of FDA approved versus what the company put on the package, you said marketing and I say marketing really leads to what? Somebody buying.
Right.
It's a bottom line is they want people to purchase their product and how it looks on the shelf to you and the verbiage, the words that they use. Not only is it packaging how pretty it is, but
Flashy.
it's flashy, but right, the words on the side of the package that say no added sugar or they say natural. What does
Right.
that
Or,
mean?
right. And honestly, So many of the marketing phrases mean nothing. Low sugar is a marketing term. It does not mean that it's necessarily low sugar. It can be whatever the brand wants it to mean. Keto friendly, diabetes friendly, all of these don't necessarily mean what they sound.
Correct. And that's, again, from a marketing standpoint, that's the frustrating piece because, as I've said many times before, we are not educated going through school in anything nutrition specific. We may hit a health class, maybe
Hmm.
in high school, maybe in middle school if you're lucky, but it totally like glazes through anything that defines how you can look at the products you're going to eventually buy yourself in a grocery store, right? So it is a frustrating piece because it just leads to more confusion and then people buy it. They're like, "Oh, look, it's cholesterol free." Right?
Right.
That was one of
Right.
my favorite ones from years ago. Cholesterol free appeared on everything.
But it was rice, and rice doesn't naturally have cholesterol. I mean, they do that a lot with gluten-free
Oh,
products, and
yes.
they put a label on something that naturally doesn't have gluten,
Right.
and all of a sudden, the sales go up. So
Of
I do
course.
think that people have to be really careful on labels
Mhm.
just to make sure that they're getting what they think they're getting.
Right. I mean, in terms of carbohydrate, then, what do you think are the terms that really need definition so that people have more information when they are looking at things at the grocery store, of which there are so many more products
Mhm.
every single year in the aisles? What do you think are some of the true words that need definition?
I mean, I like just to give people kind of a snapshot of things to look for, and fiber is absolutely going to impact diabetes management,
Right.
feeling of fullness, not having spikes in post-meal blood sugars. And so that's when I like to define. And my definition, if something is high fiber or a complex carbohydrate, generally about 5 grams of fiber
Yep.
or more is going to be really stable on your blood sugar, and we'll need to address kind of how much fiber is in something. I also like in really great quality products, I like to see more fiber than sugar. It just makes sense. If something has more good nutrition, it's going to have less of the added junk that's going to spike
Yep.
blood sugars or really just not be nutrition at all.
Right. What about since fiber does then tie into one of the very common things people look for, especially once you get into the more low carb or the keto types of products, we have this fancy term of net carbs or net carbohydrates. So
Right.
when we look at that, again, marketing perspective, they're marketing to the grand population of people, not specifically to people with diabetes, and even narrowing it further, definitely not to the population of people who are using insulin
Right.
for their
Right.
diabetes management. So, in terms of net carbs, what does that mean when we have diabetes and we're taking insulin based on the carbohydrates and their impact on our blood sugar?
Well, I think we then have to say what's included in that net carb. So they're subtracting out most often the fiber that is in a product and the sugar alcohols.
Mhm.
And depending if something's soluble fiber, insoluble fiber, or the sugar alcohols, it's going to play into blood sugars. And we'll have to adjust insulin for it, but we definitely can't just take the net carb approach.
Correct. And in general, for sugar alcohols, for example,
Yep.
defining them as like xylitol, erythritol, right? All of those alls or
Mhm.
OSS or OS kind of
Yep.
on the label ingredients, if you're looking at that. They're taking all of it out for net
Right.
carb.
Right.
When in the world of diabetes, we usually recommend only 50% of a reduction from the total carbohydrate for those sugar alcohols, right?
Exactly, right, because 'cause they're gonna impact your blood sugar, they're gonna dissipate much faster than if it was actual sugar, and it's gonna impact your blood sugar a little bit, just a little bit less, so we need a little bit of insulin, just a little bit less.
Right. And fiber is similar. I actually love the labels that have taken the step to suggest insoluble versus soluble.
Right.
And my teaching tool is, again, like you said, 5 grams or more. It's a really quality source of dietary fiber. If the label hasn't broken it down into the soluble and
Mhm.
insoluble, digestible versus cleans your body out,
Right.
right? Then it's a 50%. You take
Yep.
50% of the total dietary fiber off of the total carb count. But if it does break it down, an insoluble is a large portion. Let's say the product has 10 grams of total fiber and it's got 7 insoluble. The insoluble is not going to impact your blood sugar.
Right. We just don't
That's the
digest that the way we do
correct.
starch.
Yeah. So then that's what comes off of that total carb counts. As you can hear, it really makes a difference to know what is the label
Absolutely.
telling you if you look further.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, thinking about fiber too, we know it's going to have a delay in terms of
Mhm.
digestion. It's going to be maybe affecting insulin timing as well, which I don't
Yeah.
know if people always focus on, but that can really cause, if you take all of your insulin up front for a high fiber food, you're going to end up with a low before that subsequent rise.
Right. And that's where our smarter insulin delivery systems that we have today can really be assistive, but you have to know enough to do some experimenting. If you introduce a new low carb type of bread that's really high
Hmm.
in dietary fiber, you make some adjustments as you figure out. You say, well, I went low, I bolused for all of this. That's clearly not right. Is an extended bolus better? Is taking some now, putting some in later for your algorithm to pay attention to? It does take a little bit of time and patience.
And right, practice strategies, all the things.
Yeah, absolutely. So what else on the labels?
Well, a lot of people try to avoid a lot of the just chemical names that they're
Yeah.
not familiar with, right? There's kind of an approach of having the fewest ingredients possible, which I
Hmm.
love.
Hmm.
Does mean that things don't often have as long of a shelf life as products would, but if you can't recognize the name, oftentimes, there's a reason for that. And so that goes into some of the artificial sweeteners that people may be trying to avoid at the same time, which gets a little bit tricky. If you're avoiding artificial sugar, does that mean that you're increasing natural sugars or you're increasing just sugar in general? And so there is a
Right.
time and a place for those artificial sugars.
I think a place that I always see people trying to weigh the pros and cons or the benefit of this versus that. I think their main goals when you choose a sweetener, and obviously with diabetes, we're trying to minimize the rise in blood sugar,
Right,
right? A spike versus a nice stable or a nice gentle trend, right? If we're somebody who's paying attention to our weight, then taking out something
right.
that is much more caloric, like real sugar versus an artificial or a substitute type, could
Hmm.
mean a reduction in calories, which is supporting our weight goals. Some people also have GI side effects or those digestive sort of side effects. So those are
Hmm.
another piece to
Especially with
weigh.
those sugar alcohols that we talked about a minute ago.
Right. And then, long term, just gut health, metabolic health, all of those types of things to kind of consider. And what is also long term sustainable?
Right,
As we know it right now, type 1 is here and insulin use is going to be something that we have. So, navigating again all of these reasons for considering lower calorie, lower impact on blood sugar, but what's safest
and
in the
so
long term?
right. And, I try to always remind people things that you do on a daily basis are really what we want to make sure are high quality,
Yeah.
nutritious, and doing healthy things for your body.
Yes.
So the once in a while, the sometimes foods, maybe we don't do as much of a deep dive, but those things that are staples in your house, we really kind of want to investigate and make sure that you're getting what you expect you're getting.
Right. And one big place to start is definitely just beverages in general, right? Many people don't consider the calorie value that comes
Right.
in drinking something that's got an excess of sugar, an excess of fat. It's just something that you swish down the rest of the food
Right.
that you
Right.
acknowledge has calories, right? So if there's one place to clean up, it's drink water, even if it's sparkling water.
Right.
Try to get that kind of stuff in because there is not going to be some type of sweetener to that unless you add it as, a packet of something or whatever, right?
Right.
I mean, in
And I
terms,
find that sparkling water or carbonation can sometimes scratch that itch that people are looking for. Sometimes
yeah,
people who are trying to move away from sodas, it's the carbonation they're looking for. And so sparkling water can be
right.
a good substitute.
Yeah, we actually a couple of years ago, so I bought a soda stream. And it's really an easy way to just make and my kids actually prefer it without any flavor in it. They just
And
like
the
that
sparkling.
bubbly,
Carbonation.
sparkling kind of,
Yeah.
or a little lemon juice or a piece of tangerine squeezed into it or something like that gives
Hmm.
enough little excitement. And then you don't have to worry about the artificial types of
Right.
sweeteners. If I was picking, I tend to try to go with those that are not artificial, so to speak. I try to go to the ones that are more of what I consider an alternative. Stevia, a couple of drops of vanilla, like in my cup of coffee, I really like. Cooking, especially, I've found really good use with allulose.
I was just going to say that's kind of my shining star at the moment in terms of sweetening things. And really, there's been some studies on allulose that shows that postprandial or post meals, there's kind of a smoothing of your glycemic control. And it's
Mhm.
similar to acarbose, which, if you remember from a million years ago, is something
Yes.
we used to use in type 2 diabetes. And the allulose really, the studies look really great with it. And I think it's an easy thing to use as a substitution.
Yeah, that med, it was essentially a way for the carbs to not fully get absorbed into the
Exactly.
digestive system.
Yeah.
Why not do it with something that really does come from more real food, right? The fruits and the vegetables and those types of things that are really more alternative sweeteners come from a fermented
Right.
piece in those foods, which in general, fermentation is also good for your digestive system.
And your gut
So it
health. Absolutely.
kind of rolls forward, so to speak. And some of them even have, if you're looking at some of your gums or mints or things, they have the alternative called xylitol, which is really good for dental health. It
Hmm.
actually helps to mitigate the nasty bacteria in your mouth, keeps your breath fresh, and it also helps to decrease the chance of cavities. So there's kind of a place, I think, for all of these. And it really boils down to how much of them are you using?
Right. And of course, I think we would agree just everything in moderation is
Yes.
always something that we would preach, and having it be individualized to the person in their, their habits and their lifestyle is always where we would come from.
Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast, is brought to you by Integrated Diabetes Services, where experience meets expertise, passion meets compassion, and diabetes care is personal because we live it too. Our team of clinicians, all living with type 1 diabetes, understands the challenges firsthand. We're here to help no matter where you are in the world. From glucose management to self-care strategies, the latest tech, sports and exercise, weight loss, type 1 pregnancy, and emotional well-being, we've got you covered. We offer consultations in English and Spanish via phone, video chat, email, and text. Want to learn more? Visit integrateddiabetes.com or email info@integrateddiabetes.com to schedule a consultation.
On this.
Yeah. Even a lot of the people are tending to use more protein sort of smoothie powders and that kind of thing. And I've seen a lot more. I read a lot of labels at the grocery store, much to my boys are always telling me, Mom, it's time. Like that
Right.
wasn't even
Hurry
on
up.
our list. Like, hurry up. Right.
This is not mommy time. Right.
This is not right. Yes. I have to remember, like, they're not interested in looking at those
Right.
labels like I
Right.
am.
Yeah.
But I take a kind of a look mainly out of interest because we talk to so many people and they have questions. Hey,
Yeah.
did you see this product?
Yep.
And a lot of those types of things are actually coming around and they're taking out the sucralose or the aspartame and they're adding in something like stevia or even monk fruit.
Right. Monk fruit is getting its moment for sure.
It is. So yeah, it's an exciting time to learn more about what your labels are really telling you and to learn how to interpret them again from a long-term health perspective.
Right. Right.
What do you think are like the gimmicky? As you're talking about marketing earlier, what are the gimmicky things that we should
Well,
really watch out for?
certainly net carbs. I think that it doesn't always mean what you think it means, and we definitely need to make sure that we're looking. And then I would say sugar-free does not mean carb-free. I think that is also a misnomer that people kind of don't take a second look at. Uh, there's naturally sweetened also doesn't mean that it doesn't have cane sugar and that
Right.
it's not going to be harsh on your blood sugars. So I
Right.
I think these companies are really smart and persuasive.
Yeah. The one that I look at, again, out of interest, just solely looking at shelves, are some of the probiotic sodas and the things that are out there. And do you really need probiotic soda? Right. And it's not carb free from a
No,
standpoint of evaluating for diabetes and insulin and blood sugar. It is not carb free. It's definitely much lower than your classic
right,
whatever on the store shelf of real soda. But if you're going to eat probiotics, go eat some sauerkraut or kimchi
right, right. Or kombucha is my
or
favorite.
kombucha. Yeah.
But I guess to your earlier point, what are you substituting that? Were you a, big 24-ounce fountain soda drinker and now you're
Fair.
going to a probiotic, less sugar? I'm going to go with that every time in that scenario. But
Yep.
if you're a water drinker, we're not doing better by having some of those other processed
No.
foods.
And especially if you're paying, as I said earlier, if you're paying attention to calories from a weight management
Yep.
standpoint, or even an insulin use standpoint, switching over to some of these things may actually not be in your best interest. And then, the other one I think that is kind of gimmicky to me too, and you really have to be careful about reading the labels. You mentioned before keto friendly.
I was just going to repeat that. Yeah.
Some of them are not, they really are not keto friendly. If you know what you're doing on a ketogenic diet and you look at the labels of many of these, they are not truly keto friendly.
No, and then it also goes to what's your definition of keto because it may be different than mine. I mean, you and I just I'm sure in school, ketogenic diets were really for children who had epilepsy, and it's
Epilepsy.
a completely different guidance to what people are using it in just marketing. And so,
Correct.
what does that mean? And just because it says keto friendly doesn't mean it's healthy. Sometimes they have a tremendously high saturated fat, and it's something that you
Correct.
really wouldn't want to include just depending on your cardiovascular goals.
Right.
So, I think it really goes down to it's individualized again. And if there's no one magic food or one magic nutrition portion to look for.
No. And, from a keto standpoint, or even the ones that are more the high protein types of things, again, we have still continued to be taught that insulin is with carbohydrate. And when you want to make a transition, and maybe you're really paying attention to how many sugars and carbs and whatever, and you're trying to even things out and stabilize, and you transition into using, it's keto friendly. That means I don't have to worry about my blood sugar. That's really not the case. You
No,
know,
not at all.
really people following a ketogenic diet have figured out their insulin dosing based on the nutrients being switched around. Those macros are carbs, proteins, fats, and they're
Hmm.
just adjusted, right? But they still have to take insulin.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And, it's funny, people ask, well, what's the diet that I should follow? What's the nutrition plan? And, talking about all of these marketing ploys and ingredients to look for on the label. I always say we need to find something that works for you and what's sustainable, and then really maximize and strategize your diabetes management around that. So, yeah,
right. Yeah, I think my practical recommendations that I usually provide when somebody asks is, you have to kind of prioritize for sweeteners.
hmm,
Do you have a preference? Are you trying to sort of bring that down a level, or what's your dependence on this? How can you
right,
make some sort of sweetness lateral movements while maybe decreasing the actual sugar and the carbohydrate amount and that kind of thing? Or maybe it's moving away from processed foods. And as you said early on, many of these products that have those marketing label fancy terminology on, if you really walk around the perimeter of your grocery store, you don't find much fancy
no,
marketing.
no,
There
it's
there
just
aren't
kind of the Whole
labels.
Foods, right? Not the store, but the actual Whole Foods.
Correct. And then it's, again, as you said, individualizing. You have to figure it out based on using your smart tools that we thankfully have access to, CGM data,
Yep.
finger sticks, your insulin dosing. Does the strategy change when you do bring in a lot more natural, real food? Gosh, I was covering with this insulin to carb ratio, and now it looks like that's too much, but
Right,
I'm now eating apples instead of eating a bagged something or another,
right,
right?
right.
So just be aware that you may do some cleanup and you may find that some of your settings were covering up for some of those ingredients that who knows what they were doing.
Right, and you just kind of weren't sure maybe even that it was full sugar, but it was labeled in a way that was misleading, and now you've separated it out to something that has much higher fiber. Your insulin needs are gonna go down significantly, and so,
Right.
yeah, it's important for people to know what they're putting in their bodies so that they can adjust their insulin and their plan.
It is. I wish this was an education piece that just sort of moved forward through schooling so that we wouldn't have to educate once somebody gets unfortunately diagnosed with diabetes, that you already have a background understanding. So
Right.
hopefully this has helped to clarify some of that.
Absolutely. Or maybe we just highlighted the confusion that exists on nutrition labels.
Well, if anything, it just brings to light something to definitely pay attention to rather than just skimming it and saying, oh, well,
Right.
it says, sugar free, or it says this and this. It really is a deeper dive, just like everything with diabetes is. You
Exactly.
get some surface information and then you really have to take and look further. So,
Right.
yeah,
It's worth a second glance, I guess, would be my takeaway.
100%. It's worth a second glance and then evaluate and see how it works for you. So, yeah, awesome. Well, thanks, Dana. This was
Yeah, this was
a lot
fun.
of fun to
As
talk
always.
about. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like, follow, or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. On behalf of Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast, I'm Gary Shiner, wishing you a fantastic week ahead. And don't forget to think like a pancreas.